So yeah, we're here today. The date is the 27th of November to debate about the language policy at Stellenbosch University. So before we get into that, I think it's very important for all of us to be reminded where we are, and then from there we can have a very nuanced and fruitful discussion as far as language policy is concerned at Stellenbosch. So Stellenbosch University is a university that 21 years after democracy, it's extremely untransformed. It's well known to have a very notoriously conservative executive council. It is well known to have a notoriously also conservative convocation. And then when you come to the university, the number of, in terms of the student body, you still have a situation where the student body is predominantly white. You have a situation where the institutional culture is predominantly Afrikaans culture. You have a situation where if you happen not to be within those categories that I was just talking about, you are out of place in Stellenbosch University. So this is the context that we speak of, right? So that means the first question that we have to ask, it relates to people. We are not just here to talk about concepts and ideas and language. We are here to talk about how students experience the institution and how that experience is in the classroom, and what is it that caused the kind of experiences that we have found to be something that we should not tolerate 21 years into democracy. So, for an example, in Stellenbosch you have a situation where somebody like myself, because I don't know Afrikaans, because I somehow come from Limpopo and Afrikaans is not my language, there's this genuine belief that I don't belong here, right? I don't belong here to such an extent where you have a situation when I go to McDonald's at night, like any other students, to get food. When I'm drunk from Mystics, it's not safe. I get beaten up. The reason why I'm beaten up is because it's even being said explicitly. You don't belong here because you can't speak Afrikaans. All right? And then we move on to the classroom. I get to a classroom, I sit in a lecture hall where for the first time in my life, not in Stellenbosch, for the first time in my life, I have to do a module in Afrikaans. So I'm expected to sit in a classroom which is fully Afrikaans, or else they'll offer me some interpretation device which doesn't work practically, because you have to listen to that person and you have to listen to another person who's in your ears, and at the same time bearing in mind the weight that the reason why you have to go through this listening to two people is precisely because you're black and you don't belong here. So that means when you're in the classroom, there is the chances of you actually learning in these universities are very slim. All right? So what we are here to debate essentially is not merely about the language policy as far as Afrikaans as a language is concerned. It's about the language policy as far as the way in which Afrikaans has been used in the past, because this is not ahistorical, has been used in the past by this university, which, by the way, is the cradle of apartheid. This is where they came up with the most amazing, notoriously amazing and successful policies of actually ruining black people's lives in this country. And that was built up from colonization. So that's essentially where we're coming from. We're not coming from just an issue of language. It's how language is being used to exclude people who happen not to be Afrikaans and white. So we had a problem with this as Open Stellenbosch, as we have been saying, that our main goal is to purge the remnants of apartheid in this institution in pursuit of a truly African university. That's what we speak of when we speak to decolonization, but I'll get to that later. So first of all, let me get to Open Stellenbosch's proposed language policy that we have put forward after a long battle with the management of the university, which was not willing to listen to the issues that we have brought forth. So our language policy have got a couple of goals that I don't think any South African who's interested in being South African would argue with. but obviously that's my view. I was part of the people who came up with that language policy. There might be people who want to be South Africans, but somehow they still want to go against those principles. So let me just go and read them out for you. So the language policy that we have drafted seeks to achieve the following issues in terms of the institutional environment. We want to have an institutional environment where staff and students accommodate one another by communicating in a language that is shared by all. We want to have an environment where speakers of all official languages in this country are included. We want to have an environment where no person is unfairly discriminated against on the basis of language and communication. And we go further to say we cannot have a situation where language is being used as a barrier to access to participation in the life of the institution. What that entails is, for example, when I'm in residences, if somebody wants to tell me about something happening in res, they have to speak to me in a language that I understand. Otherwise, it's ridiculous for me to stand there because I feel stupid, I am excluded, and that's not what any institution in this country, especially a public institution, should be doing. So we go on further to say the language of acquisition of the official languages of South Africa is encouraged and enabled. What that means is Majalechi should be able to speak to Mohammed and say, Mohammed, Dumela. It should be so friendly that I even feel okay with speaking my own language, regardless of the fact that I spend much of my time in class learning to English. And then we go on to say we want to have an environment where the language of languages that are not South African languages also do have a place in South Africa. But beyond that, one thing that we have learned as we were advocating for the language policy is that there's a problem in the issue of acknowledging how language and access to education speaks to a broader issue of how struggles intersect. That means, as Open Stellenbosch, we have learned that we can't be saying we are arguing for access and fighting for access for everyone if we don't think about people who use sign language, for example. I mean, everyone is making a fuss about, I don't want to use English, I prefer Afrikaans, but there are people who, by the way, can't use none of those. We don't even talk about them. They're invisible. And that's something that we should actually be ashamed of ourselves, that we make a fuss about preferences before we talk about people's dignity, people's access. This room is full of able-bodied people. Most of us in this room. The reason you don't see somebody else here interpreting is because it's precisely why Open Stellenbosch is here. We are here to say everyone should have access. That's why in our language policy we have taken an initiative to ensure that we speak to say, when we speak of access, and our language policy is not limited to English as we have put forward to say English should be the lingua franca in the university. It's much more broader than that, because we have come to learn a great deal of things in the course of the year. So, essentially what we are talking about, then it boils down to the question of whether we are here to argue about language. Are we here to argue about language as in Afrikaans or English? No. We are not just here to argue about language per se. We are here to speak to how the past shapes the present and the future, right? We are here to talk about how that past shaping the present and the future through language gets to dictate what is perceived as knowledge, and who matters, and what matters, and how that knowledge is produced, and how that knowledge is consumed, and by who, all right? So, we have identified that in order to solve that problem, which we have termed, we call decolonization for those who are not familiar with it, in order to solve that problem, we found that there's a fundamental problem that is actually contributing to the nature of Stellenbosch to be this this sort of white enclave in post-1994. So we said, no, we're not going to have that situation. So what we will do as Open Stellenbosch, we have identified language as the rallying point for the reason Stellenbosch looks the way it looks. All right, and we disagree with that, fundamentally. In principle, it's, in fact, the concept of Stellenbosch as it stands in itself, currently, I know most of you might not have thought it before, but it's extremely violent to think that you can be in Africa and build a town in the image of Europe. You must denounce those people so bad that you feel like they are a debt. To have your life and to have you living your life with those people, being among them, being one of them, to you feels so demeaning that you'd rather build a little Europe. You'd rather spend billions in infrastructure maintenance, just washing off a wall, while you have black students who don't have the amount of money to pay fees. And this institution is spending a lot of money in washing the walls of the building. The reason why they do that is because they want to maintain this institution having a feel of a European sort of like, I don't know, nostalgia, whatever that is. So essentially what we are trying to solve and what we are trying to bring to you is that we have a situation where council is going to be meeting on Monday. Council is going to be meeting on Monday, and one of the key issues that we'll be discussing is the future of this university. The future of this university, as in relation to the language policy, asks questions, a very simple question. It's not so difficult. It's not about, do we want this language or do we want that language? What about the other languages? The question that you have to ask is that, do you want to exclude people or do you want to have an environment where everyone feels welcome to study? And I believe everyone who's rational and who wants to be a South African would say yes. They would want to live with everyone. Unless, of course, they don't want to live with us. We are fine with it. It's Black Friday, so the tickets are very cheap to go to Canada. So that's the fundamental issue that we have before us, right? We have a situation where we have to start asking the right questions. And the right question is not how do we maintain an exclusive policies of the past. Is how do we build an institutional culture that ensures that all South Africans have access to this institution and ensures that we're moving towards a future where we can live together and study in a context that enables, especially in the spirit of redress, those who were the least well-off members of society in the past. And those people are majority black people. You don't have black people in this university. You don't have black professors. Part of the reason of that, we have a situation where somebody couldn't get a job in REMS, precisely because that person can't speak Afrikaans. I mean, what the actual F is that? What the fuck is that? How can I not get a job in a residence just because I can't speak Afrikaans? And by the way, there's no policy. I know a lot of people say, well, there's nothing written that says you can't get this job if you're not Afrikaans. Of course, those people are not stupid. There won't be a policy that says if you're not Afrikaans, you shouldn't get that job. But it's implicit in the way they think, in the way they live, in the way they interact with one another in the institution. You get to a meeting, people speak Afrikaans only, and you're a staff member, and apparently you're supposed to contribute. And they know very well that you don't have any clue of what they're talking about. What the actual fuck is that? Like, are we expected to actually tolerate those kind of stuff? I'm sorry for that language. The reason I'm using that language is because I could have been much more angrier, but I've decided that for the purpose of this discussion, which speaks to the most important aspect of building a new university, of decolonizing this university. And by the way, decolonization is not a process where we ask permission from people who had power in the past, which are Afrikaans people. We're going to do it whether you like it or not. The question is whether you're going to join and become part of a new South Africa, or you remain in those enclaves that everyone else still wants to maintain. Thank you.